Thank you, Professor. First, it's a great privilege to be here, to be able to address this audience, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. This is a topic I'm getting progressively addicted to over the last 3 months. Not to the currencies themselves. I have bought a few of them, but I'm not speculating, so I'm not getting rich. But I'm getting intellectually addicted to that topic, and I can hardly think of anything else. And I think anybody who's interested in money in general and in monetary economics in particular, whatever you think on substance, whether you think it's serious or not, you cannot help being addicted. And the reason for that, I think, has been very, very well summed up recently in a video by a very popular American comedian. I think he's British, but actually he's living and working in the United States. And he's called John Oliver, and he's made a kind of 30-minute sequence on Bitcoin, which I would advise you, every one of you, to watch. And he says cryptocurrency are everything you don't understand about money combined with everything you don't understand about computers. And that's exactly, I think, the reason why it's so fascinating. You have that mix of technological mystery and money. Now, more seriously, I found that quote by Milton Friedman going back in 1999, 20 years ago, right? At the end of his life. And that quote is absolutely fascinating if you read about it. The internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. And the one thing that's missing, and I put it in bold, a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A, the way in which I can take a $20 bill and hand it over to you, and there's no record of where it came from, and you may get that without knowing who I am. That could be a prospectus for the Bitcoin, and that could be a prospectus for cryptocurrency. And I think everything we're going to talk about today is actually in that quote. The technology which is changing, maybe changing the form of money, we don't know, but that's a question mark. The aspiration for having peer-to-peer monetary relations which are not intermediated by a bank or by a third party. The anonymity, the rest of the paragraph shows the problems and the drawbacks and the dark side of anonymity, and the ability to move money around very quickly. And if you talk to young people, people who've been raised at the age of the internet, they just don't understand why we can send an email and get a communication in the other part of the world in 1 second, and why we cannot send $20, $50, 50 euros, 100 euros, why it would take 3, 4, 5 days and a lot of cost to do the same thing. So the aspiration is there, the aspiration to have a form of money or usage of money which is adapted to the age of the internet, right? And that's what we're going to discuss today. Both, looking at the current picture, and the current picture is definitely mixed, and then doing some kind of science fiction and wondering whether what's happening on the technology front will change the nature of money and the structure of our monetary and financial system. Now, the last thing I wanted to show, of course, and this is a sign of caution, is clearly that we are discussing this topic in a very bubble-like environment. And in a bubble-like environment, it's very difficult to distinguish what is true and what is fantasy. And a lot of fantasy things I've been told about this topic right now. So these two graphs, of course, on the left-hand side, you show the Bitcoin price over the last 2 years. And just to have a comparison, I show the housing prices in the US. Now, the similarity between the graphs are absolutely astounding. The comparison is not absolutely fair because on the Bitcoin it's 2 years, on the US house prices it's almost a century. But the similarity is absolutely astounding, and we clearly have gone through, or maybe still be going through, something which cannot totally be explained by the technology. And we can discuss about it. So it's very hard to sort of it's very hard to distinguish between the fantasy and the reality. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to try and first look at the current cryptocurrencies, and then, as I said, do a little bit of science fiction and explore scenarios for the future. So the current cryptocurrencies, the first thing I'd like to say is that they are truly new monetary objects. They are not true monies. They are very inefficient as medium of exchange. I don't think they offer a reliable store of values, and it's obvious they are not unit of accounts. Nobody quotes, very few people quote their price in bitcoins or get their wages denominated in bitcoins or ether or whatever. But the interesting thing for us is that they are true new monetary objects. Now, if we stare at the surface of things, we tend to think that all money share two characteristics. It's abstract, it has no intrinsic value. A banknote has no intrinsic value, a bank account has no intrinsic value, and it's more and more digital. A bank account is digital, the money I have on my smartphone is digital. So we tend to think that there's nothing new in kind of cryptocurrencies, which are no intrinsic value and which are intrinsically digital. Well, that's not true. That's not true. It would be very wrong to see a continuum between the kind of money we are using right now and those monetary objects. Those monetary objects are actually very different, and they are totally unprecedented. So to understand that, it's very important to have a sort of grasp of what kind of money object we are using now. So most of the money, we are using banknotes. We'll come back to it, currency, cash, and I have a few maybe provocative things to say about cash. But we're also using, most of our money is actually the bank account. It's money deposited and written in a bank account. It might be used through many, many kind of instruments, but at the end of the day, it's still a bank account. So a bank account. And even e-money, what we call electronic money, which has been called e-money for many, many, many decades now, which sometimes can be used just by the click on the smartphone, and in China, that's what they're doing more and more. This is still money which has a mirror 1-for-1 in the bank account. This is bank money. So it's a money, it's a claim on the bank, it's a liability of the bank, it's private, but it's backed by the government or another. You can convert it into official currency, banknotes, and banks have a sort of, whether explicit or not, guarantee. And your deposit, of course, have a deposit guarantee beyond certain limits. So this is the kind of money we've been using for 120 years now. Bank money, private, liability of the bank, and backed one way or another by the government. Now, we tend to think this is a natural state of matter, but of course it's not. It's only back to 120 years. And it is clearly a joint product of our social habits and of the technology. Now, those currencies, if they one day impose themselves and gain acceptance, which is a big if, they are totally different. They are totally different, although they are the same immaterial as the one. And they are no liability of no one. There's no bank. You cannot claim anyone for those currency. They have no backing, neither physical, nor financial, nor legal. Right? So these are totally new monetary objects. And I've asked a lot of people, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there are specialists here who will sort of tell me I'm wrong. But I cannot think in the last 2 or 3 centuries, any kind of money which has those 3 characteristics together, being a liability of no one and have no physical backing and have no legal backing. So these are private monies with no backing of government and a liability of no one. We already have private monies in the 19th century. The banks were issuing banknotes in the US, the free banking area in the US, which ended in trouble, and we'll talk about it again. We already had that. But at that time, when you held a banknote from an American bank, you had a claim on the bank. You could go at the bank and ask for your claim to be converted into specie, into physical assets. Here, when you hold those currencies, you have no claim at all. It's just like a kind of digital cash. cash. It's not a claim on anyone. So it's a very, very, very different monetary object from the one we are used to. And the similarity of the electronic form should not blind us to the big, big differences in the monetary dynamic. Private currency, no backing. It has, to my knowledge, never existed in the market economy. Of course, if you go back far in time, you had desert islands where people, or villages where people would pay themselves with stones or with peanuts or whatever. But these were small communities which we had a sense of community which helped to make monetary object acceptable. But in modern economies, we didn't have. In addition, and we'll discuss that a lot, most of the cryptocurrencies have an issuance regime and a management which is decentralized. So there's a very big libertarian streak behind the movements of current cryptocurrencies. Decentralization is the key word. And it's also, in my view, the key problem, and we'll discuss it. The closest equivalent is gold and cash, but it's not fully equivalent in gold and cash, because gold and cash, you don't depend on a system, on a third party to use them. Whereas those currencies, they only exist to the extent that the network is maintained, that the protocols work, that the electricity is available. So although they pretend to be a little bit like gold and cash, they are not. They are intangible and they depend on the physical third party to exist. Most of them have a very primitive monetary regime, which means that they are issued in totally limited quantity with an absolute ceiling on their issuance, which of course, if they were to be accepted as means of payments and unit of accounts, would impart a huge deflationary bias. The prices denominated in those currencies, if the transaction were to increase, would have to decrease over time. And this expectation is factored in already in many of the decisions to buy and hold those currencies. So it's a very, very primitive monetary regime, but a very astute business model. This is very seldom said, and I don't want to be derogatory here, but most of the business model of those currencies is creating a seigniorage, which a few people would appropriate. So it's the creation and appropriation of a private seigniorage, the income that you derive from issuing money. From that point of view, Bitcoin may be the most sort of honest currency. The currency is issued, and it's issued and it pays the work that people are doing to keep the network. So the seigniorage is allocated to people who work to keep the network. I hope I'm not too abstract there. This is a network. It has to be kept. It has to be maintained. It has to be entered. The protocols have to be worked on, and so on. So people are paid for that, and they're paid by the issuance of a new currency. That's okay. Ether, which is the second biggest cryptocurrency, works exactly the same way. But a lot of them, including part of Ether, they issue the currency. They allocate it through some kind of specified rule. Most of the time, the owners of the system keep a large part of the currency, and of course, they wait for the currency to appreciate in value, and then they have a private seigniorage. This is a very astute business model. This is not the one you would like to see if you're going to use those currencies as means of payments or stores of value in the future, and we'll come back to it. And I think people are getting more and more aware of it, that this kind of business model is a little bit doubtful and problem creating. Underpinning this, and I'm not going to go into long discussion about the blockchain, underpinning this is the famous technology which is called the blockchain. There's one thing which, out of these slides, there's only one message which I will insist upon. The blockchain is a distributed ledger, so it's pretty clear what it means. It means instead of having a central database on a transaction, on balances, on records, that database is totally demultiplied with identical copy, which are maintained and kept and updated in real time amongst hundreds or thousands of participants. That's where the That's where the technical achievement is. It's a huge technical achievement to be able to do that. And in a few minutes, we'll see that it may have very significant applications in our economies. So this is a blockchain, decentralized database. But decentralized consensus. So this is the very important thing. So when you have a database which is constantly updated, like thousands, million times a day, because new transactions, new balances, new things happen, new objects are moved around in the database, you have to agree between all the people participants to the system what is the state of the database. And this is called the consensus mechanism. Now, let's say we are a network here. All of us are participants in the network, and every minute or so we have to agree on the state of the database, right? And the process, the protocols through which we will agree is the consensus system. And in addition, we don't trust each other. We don't trust each other. So, and we still have to find ways to agree on what is the state of the system, right? Now, this is called in the literature a very nice name. This is the Byzantine general problem, because the first article in cryptology which has been written on that is in 1982. And in 1982, someone imagined a situation where 12 or 15 Byzantine generals were taking a siege around the country, and they had to decide on when to attack and make sure that when they attack together and there's no failure in the coordination of the system, right? But between 1/4 and 1/3 of the generals are traitors, and a certain percentage of the messengers between them are traitors as well. And they have to agree on the process to make sure that they decide when to attack, and that when they decided that the majority of all the honest generals are on board, and that the dishonest generals are not allowed to corrupt the decision and the process. That's the Byzantine general. And to my understanding, I'm not an expert of cryptology, so I'm just repeating what I heard and read. To my understanding, there's no perfect solution to that problem. It has been demonstrated that that problem cannot be solved as such. But you can approach a good solution if you create incentives. So the whole thing, the whole genius about Bitcoins and the cryptocurrencies in general is to thinking about an incentive system. These people are economists in a way. So they think about incentive systems so to make sure that people who behave badly are punished, and that people who behave well, meaning in getting the consensus to progress and to be honest, are rewarded. So we can discuss, if there are questions, how this consensus process works, to my understanding. But the very important thing, and I think it's very intuitive and very easy to understand, is that such a decentralized system between non-trusted, it is time-consuming and it is resource-consuming. So validating a transaction or an update of the database in such a system, I say almost intrinsically, takes a lot of time and takes a lot of resources. That's the reason why you see those headlines, Bitcoin using as much electricity as Hungary or Iceland, because this is not the network itself. The network itself is not consuming resources. What is consuming resources is the consensus mechanism, which is imposed by the fact that they want to be decentralized and then they want to be secure and honest at the same time. Now, if you read all the literature on that, no one of them pretends they have fully solved the problem. No one of them pretend that you can run, although there's been huge progress in technology and huge progress in interconnections, of course, that you can solve the problem of running a totally decentralized database in a honest way, in a very efficient thing. That's the key of the cryptocurrency today, and that's what is both their strength in a way and their Achilles heel. So for that reason, of course, they are very poor medium of exchanges. You know the numbers, some of you may know the numbers. You can operate around 70 transactions by minute. On Bitcoin, you do 200,000 transactions by minute on Visa. And yes. That's spectacular, you know. So sometimes we tend to think how much progress we've made in payment system the last 20 years. We've made enormous progress in payment system in the last 20 years. Enormous in retail.
Last release has transaction by
100
150,000
per minute for Visa.
no, for Bitcoin transactions. The new release they have removed.
Oh, we'll discuss that. You're talking about Lightning, aren't you? Yes, we'll talk about Lightning, right? We'll talk about it. Yeah, I'm glad you asked, and so maybe I'll go on and we discuss that after. Yeah, okay? Yeah. That's a project that does not exist. Okay, let's discuss it. Now, Ether does better because Ether has come 3 or 4 years after Bitcoin, and the protocol is written in a smarter way. So it does 1,500 transactions per minute. Ripple, I don't know whether many of you have heard about Ripple. Ripple is a very interesting, it's the 3rd biggest currency by market capitalization today. Ripple does much better, but Ripple is not a fully decentralized system. So all the systems which work a little bit better, sometimes, and this is my theory about Lightning, Lightning is not fully a blockchain. Sometimes they are not fully decentralized. And Ripple is now making big headways, although the activity is very small, but the idea is interesting. But it's a process where people, it's actually a 2-level process. So it's basically reproducing the 2-tier banking system that we know. Those who are very pure, very decentralized, they are dealing with a lot of inefficiency. And they are dealing with something, I'm just going to be slight foreign, basic industrial economics here. They are dealing with something which is very, very worrisome when you're talking about payment, which is increasing marginal cost and decreasing returns when the volumes increase. Now, the payment system as we know them, huge infrastructure, and then that infrastructure is able to deal with millions of payments. And so actually, when you increase the volumes of payments, the unit cost by payment decreases. And when you produce banknotes, the volume of payment the cost by banknote decreases. Here, because of the consensus, it is exactly the contrary. And I've shown you 3 graphs here, which describe what has happened from, I think, the middle of 2017 to the end of March 2018. So on the left-hand side, you have the number of transactions per day for Bitcoin, and you can see that they increased. They increase, but not so much because the capacity of Bitcoin is severely limited by its consensus rule, right? So they increase and they decrease enormously. You could see that the cost per transaction has dramatically increased. So you have a parallel increase between the volume of transaction and the cost per transaction. Now, in any payment system, it goes the other way around, right? So having an increasing marginal cost and decreasing return for a payment system is an economic nonsense. That is the heart of the inefficiency. It's not a question of congestion of the network, it's a question of the consensus rule, which are here. And the reason, of course, and you can see it, is that the consensus works in such a way that people have an incentive to mobilize enormous amounts of computing power. And you have here a statistic on the right-hand side of the amount of computing power which has been mobilized in the Bitcoin network in the last 6 months, which is called the hash rate, which is the computing power by second. And you see that gone up enormously. And these are all the farms which have been created in China, in Iceland, and everywhere. And they are there. They're shown there in these graphs. So there is a sort of tensions here. And to be true, I'm happy we can discuss it later. There's a tension between the desire to have a decentralized, anonymous system which works perfectly well from a cryptographic point of view and the economic efficiency. And at the moment, that tension hasn't been resolved. And the promoters themselves of cryptocurrency recognize that in terms of efficiency, speed, and cost, they do not match a traditional payment system. They haven't given up. And your remark, they haven't given up, but at the moment it's not working. Are there stores of value? Because this is the last point when you have to decide whether a currency is a good one or not. Well, they have high volatility, of course. It's pretty clear. I've shown the prices, but so does gold. So in a sense, it's not something which could be which could be argued against them being proper store of value over the long run. Maybe the volatility would decrease over the long run. They have low correlation with other assets. So you have seen some I would say, adventurous asset manager who use that to put a small proportion of those cryptocurrencies in their portfolio. Some hedge funds are putting a small proportion in the portfolio, and they see that based on 3 or 4 years correlation, 3-4 years correlation is a very short period of time, of course, but based on 3-4 years, they sort of improve the Sharpe ratio, meaning more risk with less risk with return, or more return with less risk. So they tell us, having 5 to 10%, 5-7% of Bitcoin or Ether in your portfolio improves a little bit, but of course. But the main argument that you can see, and this is an argument, and that's one of the things which fascinated me, right, is that because the issuance is capped forever, it's scarce. And because it's scarce, it has value. Okay? So it appeals to all of us. Everything which is scarce should have value. Well, this is one of the theoretical questions that I'm going to deal with in my future research, and I'm not sure that scarcity is enough to bring value. Scarcity may be a condition, a necessary condition for value. It may not be a sufficient condition to bring value. And so an object which is scarce but has no intrinsic value, no usage value right to now. They have no usage value because they are very poor means of payments. And no expected return, whether certain or contingent. What kind of value can it be given to it? So the pretense that it could become digital gold in a sense is today a little bit adventurous. Now, if and when, and this will be the big discussion in my second part, if and when they come to have some usage value, if and when, to speak the language of monetary economists, there's a coordination of belief and people start to accept them on the basis and the assumption that other people will accept them, then they have a usage value. Then if they have a usage value, then they can become a store of value. That is not the case today, but it's a kind of very delicate equilibrium. But today it's not the case, clearly not. And they could very, very well go back to zero in the foreseeable future. Nevertheless, if we forget about the high PE, if we forget about the ambitions, there are very, very concrete possible use for those technologies, and those are going to be developed. The first one, there's one good thing about the blockchain, one very, very good thing about the blockchain, which is a so bad thing, but the very good thing about the blockchain, when you put something into it, nobody can remove it. Nobody. So if I write in the blockchain, I was in this conference today at 6 p.m. And you certify by signing it, we put that into a blockchain, nobody can alter that record. Nobody. Without it becoming immediately obvious to millions of people. That's a big advantage. And that's a big advantage in areas or countries or regions of the world where you need a trustable recording system. So in many countries which don't have a proper land register, having a land register on the blockchain, independently of the efficiency of the corruptness of the government, would be an extraordinary plus. And here you don't need to update it a million times a day. You know, if you adapt it 2-3 times a day, and then all I said about the cumbersome, the character of the technology would not play. So having it as a permanent record is very good. Timestamping, as I said, when I want to put a time on an event and make sure that nobody can tamper with it, this is very good as well. I can prove identity of signature. And I can do a lot of things. Now, on the Ether, which is the second biggest, in addition to having the sort of basic protocol, you can implement what they call smart contracts, which are actually a basic operation executed automatically by algorithm. Right? And the combination of having a register or a database that everybody can watch, and things which are automatically, you can immediately think in the field of finance, and that's why many banks are interested by that. What kind of advantages it could procure? You look at supply chains, you look at trade finance, you look at collateral management. These are things which are extremely easily, at least conceivably, can be put on a blockchain. Now let's take collateral management, for instance. Okay, so let's say we do a repo between two parties. That repo's a call for margin calls if some thresholds are met. You can all put that into the algorithm, and then the contract self-execute itself, and everybody can watch that the contract is self-executing. You can do that for trade finance. You can do that for supply chain. So huge possible implication. And there's the third one, which is exploding right now. Because I told you that we had made a lot of progress in payment system. There is one area where we haven't made progress at all in payment system, or at least we are lacking, is cross-border payment. And on cross-border payment, already the cryptocurrencies have a huge advantage. So let's try to figure out, imagine the example I always give, I am in Mexico, and I have a member of my family who's staying in Korea, right? And they need money, or I have a nephew or a son who's studying. I need to send him or her, let's say 1,000 euros. Now, if I do that by the banking system, it's going to take 4 or 5 intermediaries, 3, 4, 5 days, 2 exchange operations, because I will go from the Mexican peso to the dollar, and to the dollar, from the dollar to the Korean won. And it will cost me 5-7%. I can do it for free pool on Bitcoin very, very easily. And the risk I take in Bitcoin, it will take 2 or 3 hours for reasons which are, as I said, linked to the consensus. In 3 hours, the currency may move a little bit, but the risk is not that big that it doesn't make it efficient. So cross-border payment is certainly an area where those things are already reasonably competitive as compared to the ones we have now. The 2 first bullet points I put here, and I should have put it. It's a problem with the slides. I think I should have put it more. These are most of the time blockchains which are restricted or private. So as I told you, if we have a blockchain which is open, like all of us, we have participants in the blockchain, and we don't trust each other, the consensus mechanism is very complicated and cumbersome. But let's say we isolate 10 of us, and we trust each other. We know we're not going to cheat because we have a long-term relationship. We are operating a system together. So we have a reputation to preserve inside the system. Then, and only us can access the blockchain. Then we can have a consensus mechanism which is much lighter, and the blockchain may be much faster, and the transaction may be much faster. So private blockchain, closed blockchain, permission blockchain, these are already very, very interesting technologies, and that's why it explains why the finance and many professions are interested into them. There are legal issues. I'm not a legal expert. I haven't looked at them very closely. But of course, enforcing legally things which happen automatically in algorithms on the internet may be a challenge. But I know that lawyers, tons of lawyers, are working very hard on this. Maybe I'll skip to that because I've already taken a lot of time, but I'm prepared to come back to the very complex issue of initial coins offering. So what would be my conclusion today in terms of how we should look at those animals, right? Are they monies? No, they are not. They are very poor medium of exchange, but they have some characteristic of monies. Are they financial assets? No, but they have some characteristic of financial asset. Are they commodities? They are treated as such in many countries, but they are more than that, or different than that. So we don't know what they are. And the reason we don't know what they are is that because we are in a very transitional phase of development. And so when we think about how to regulate them, my advice today would be twofold. First, do not rush to sort of put them into one category into another. This is a natural reflex and the natural reaction of regulators. So we should define them as security. We should define them as currencies. We should define them as commodities, and then you have all the regulation which comes out. So it makes you feel safe, but it's not technologically neutral, and we want the regulation to be technologically neutral. Let's leave them in the open. Let's leave them as objects to develop as objects we don't know exactly what they are, because this is the truth of the matter today. On the other hand, having gone through the financial crisis of 2000 and 2009, I know that what can create trouble for a financial system is not the fact that one class of asset suddenly loses its value. The market capitalization of those things is about the same amount of what was lost on the subprime, 400 billion, the market today. So the world economy can easily absorb a collapse of an asset class of 400 billion, provided there's no interconnection too intense and too leverage with the rest of the financial system. So if we regulate, we have to regulate not the object themselves, but the interface with the financial system. We should, as much as possible, as I think, prevent the traditional financial system for building leverage, taking exposure, taking risk on the cryptocurrency system. That's very important. We should not allow them at this stage in the portfolio of institutional investor. We should not encourage banks to take exposures on them or to liquefy their market. And we should have a very close look at the exchanges, which are the platforms on which these currencies are exchanged towards fiat official currencies. So not regulate them, but isolate them into the cyber world where they should be allowed to develop without creating financial stability risk for the rest at the moment. This is a temporary attitude, but we don't know, again, where technology leads us. And because we don't know, again, where technology leads us, I would like to indulge, if you allow me, if I'm still on time, a little bit of science fiction and ask very simply, technology is transforming everything. The internet is transforming everything. It's transforming finance. It's transforming industry. It's transforming everything, architecture, whatever. Any human activity is being transformed by the internet. Is money going to be transformed by the internet? And I think the question I want to ask is, could a private money succeed in the digital age? Yes or no? If yes, will it be centralized or decentralized? And in all cases, what are the consequences for the central banks and the financial system? So I'm not sure the central banks right now are very comfortable with that way of posing the questions. And you may have noticed that in the last 3 months, a sequence of top and major central banks have come out with speeches which, in my view, were, if not coordinated, agreed on the message, which were very, very negative on cryptocurrencies. So the idea that some kind of digital currency could emerge, which would play a role and compete with official fiat currency, is not popular right now. Let's do, nevertheless, a little bit of science fiction. First, is there a need? Is there a demand? And then when you go back to the original quote by Milton Friedman, you can see that the demand may be there. And to make it very schematically, demand for the households and demand from the corporates. Demand from the households, and I will deal with that. But the households may want some kind of peer-to-peer instruments of payments available immediately and which can be equivalent of digital cash. And actually, to anticipate what I'm saying, by repressing cash as much as we've been doing, as authorities have been doing in the last 20 years, for very good reasons, but by repressing cash as much as we may be encouraging the appearance of those instruments, which share a lot of the characteristics of cash, which Milton Friedman has correctly seen. Peer-to-peer, instant, immediate. Ownership is possession. You don't need a third party to tell you that you own it. You own it. You don't need a third party to transfer it. You transfer it yourself by hand or by click of a computer. So there may be a demand for that. And then another demand, which I cannot assess in terms of its importance or not. But what you see developing is a lot of tasks, and I mentioned a few of them, which are executed on a network between machines, managed and ordered by algorithms. Right? So trade finance, collateral, and so on. And I can think maybe of hundreds of them. So maybe a huge part of the future is machine interacting between themselves through algorithms on the internet. And of course, we live in a market, in a monetary society. And so machine interacting between themselves on the internet need to transfer value to one another. And the example I gave about managing a collateral contract, you permanently transfer value in a collateral contract, margin calls, cash flows, and so on. So if I have interest swaps, I transfer a lot of value. If it's done by machine and an algorithm, those machines need a practical way to transfer value to each other. And that's a new form of money. No doubt for me about it. I cannot assess its importance. I cannot assess its relevance. But I'm pretty sure, having looked at it for many weeks now, it's a new form of money. It's a digital token. It's the equivalent of a money that you exchange on the internet, which has no bank account attached to it, which has which is not the liability of anyone. This is a new form of money. Of course, you could do it through a bank account. You could send a transfer to a bank account and go to the normal payment system. Well, for machine which exchange payments with a trillion-second delay, this is, I mean, a lot of engineers would tell you that it's not an acceptable solution. So we may need, maybe there's a demand. Again, maybe it's a marginal one, maybe it's a huge one. I cannot tell. Maybe there's a demand for new forms of money to operate algorithms on the internet which have an economic impact and which necessitate the transfer of value. I think this is a credible thing. So those two demands are there. And that's why what I'm telling is not fully science fiction, only partially science fiction. Could those demands be met by a private supplier? I think that's the essence of the monetary questions. That forces us to go deep, and I'm not at the end of my road on that, so this is maybe a partial assessment. That forces us to go deep into monetary history and monetary theory. Now, in monetary history, as I said, we had private currencies, which were the liabilities of banks, and they all collapsed. And they all collapsed one or another. This was the latest big crisis was in 1907, and that led to the creation of Federal Reserves in 1913. They all collapsed because there were bank issued, and there were runs on the banks, and there were permanent episodes of instability and crisis. So our vision of private currencies, privately issued currencies, is, of course, strongly colored by the fact that private money systems have collapsed and have been the siege of many, many crises. But of course, this was a different world with a different technology. So now we have a technology which allows a few things which were absolutely unthinkable before. Right? First, and I cannot insist too much on this, the possibility of reaching a large number of people in a very short period of time. Right? That is very important, very important. So having, usually what could impede the development of a currency is the absence of network effect. Now, in the digital economy we're in, you can build a network in a very short period of time. One of the statistics in the last 10 years, which has struck me most, it took 50 years for radio to reach 50 million people. It took about 30 years for telephones. It took about 5 years or 10 years for TV. And it took about 3 weeks for Candy Crush, the games. So in the digital economy, you can reach 50 million people in 1 month. 50 million people is an economy by itself. So the whole idea that so there's something new there, and I could give you example, but at the moment we just been closed what an initial coin offering on the messagerie which is called Telegram. Maybe some of you are using it, right? 200 million users, and they've issued a new currency which is called the TON, T-O-N, and they've raised $1.2 billion on a project which most experts say is technically absolutely imprecise and uncertain. So the whole idea is there, create that currency in that network. 200 million people, it's an economy. It's a bigger population than Germany and France, right? And so it's not an absurd thinking that they would do it. It's not an absurd thinking. Amazon has registered 2 trademarks. One of them is amazoncoin.com and another one is amazon digital.com, which are clearly trademarks which could cover the creation of a currency. Right? So huge networks exist, and the network effect of creating a currency is totally changed by the technology. Second, the possibility of issue a currency with no backing. It's just a question of writing a few lines of code. And something which has not been used up to now, because as I said, the issuance regime were very primitive, the possibility to regulate issuance with an algorithm. And so when you have when you feel like a little bit like a sort of anarchist in my mind, when I think a little bit like an anarchist in my mind, I was wondering whether a good artificial intelligence would regulate the interest rates, would determine interest rates better or worse than 15 people sitting in a room for 2 days. You have to ask yourself that. You have to ask yourself that. Again, there's a little bit of science fee, but it's not totally absurd. So that raised the big question. The big question, and there are maybe better monetary experts in this room than I am, on the deep nature of money. And as you know, there are 2 strands of thoughts on that. People who say money exists because people think it is money. And so we hold money because we know that other people will be willing to hold money as well. And that's what creates the nature of money. Money has no intrinsic value. It's been qualified as a bubble in some articles because its value can fall to 0 if the coordination of beliefs disappears or coordinate on a 0 value. So that's the first value of money, the first approach of money. And if you believe in that approach, then having a private currency building up on a network of 200, 500 million people, 1 billion people is not an absurdity at all. Because in that vision of the currency, you don't need the government, you don't need backing, you just need the network and the certainty in each of us that the others will accept it as money. So maybe getting deeper in the theory will help, but that's the essence. And of course, the other theory is that money exists because because it used to be, the government can require you to pay taxes with some money. It can require you to pay your debts with some money. That's called legal tender, and that's what makes money. So you can combine the 2 explanations and say, of course, money has a multiple equilibrium environment. It depends on the coordination of belief, but the beliefs are anchored in one equilibrium by the fact that the government has given them legal tender. But the relationship between the 2 factors, as I understand it, is a matter of debate. And it has been, I think, debated when we created the euro, because the euro is a very specific kind of money, its relationship to government and legal tender. So this question of monetary theory, I think, has to be revisited today in the light of technology, because we have to ask ourselves whether a private network with several tens of billions of hundreds of millions of people can emerge as a competitor to official currency. And that depends on our vision of money. Supposing it does, or supposing we go down that route, will it be centralized or decentralized? Well, as I said, decentralized systems up to now are very imperfect technologically. And also, I'm working on that right now. I think on the long run, they have huge governance problems. Because what you're basically doing, if you're managing a private currency in a decentralized way, you're basically managing a public good by creating permanent incentive for people to provide that public good. And I'm not sure that works in the long run. I'm not sure that the incentives will be perfectly aligned in every single circumstances. I'm not sure that Bitcoin would have survived the 2008 crisis because the 2008 crisis called for a lot of measures which could not have been forecasted in algorithm. So consensus, they will have to change the rules, and changing the rules in the decentralized system when people only look at their short-term incentives is very difficult. So there's a coordination problem there. And we have institutions exactly for that, it seems to me. We have institutions because we cannot expect as a group to behave in the interest of the group all the time if we only look at our own individual incentives, it seems to me. So I'm going to work on that. There may be legal experts and constitutional experts there. So the constitutional basis or the institutional basis of a decentralized money seems to me extremely fragile. And so if I had to gamble a little bit, I would gamble that the next, if there is a private money, it will be a centralized one. And that is going to be very, very disappointing for the people who sincerely believe that you can create a decentralized monetary system, people who look at Hayek, monetary competition, and so on. I think this is going to be the case. And in addition, there are some positive arguments which favor a centralized system of currency. Now, the digital economy is an economy with increasing return. So once you've reached 100 million customers, reaching the other 100 million costs almost nothing, right? So there are plenty of increasing return, and it's very well known that it's a winner-take-all economy. The first one wins everything. The best video games outranked by many parameters the second best video games. The best application for doing something outranked by the best rock singer on the internet outranks by many. And so the best currency will outrank the other one. So we may if we go down that route, we may have some kind of currency competition. But at the end of the day, my expectation, again, it's purely conjecture. My expectation is that the logic of the digital economy, at least I would want to research on that. My expectation is that the logic of the digital economy, which is the logic of winner-take-all, will take over. Now, it's winner-take-all, but it's very mobile. We had winner-take-alls 20 years ago. We don't exist today. So it remains to be seen whether we want to be in that kind of situation regarding our currencies, regarding our monies, and whether we want to open that kind of competition between big monopolies on issuing monies that we have seen on many other goods. I think this is an interesting question for the future, and this is the key question for policymakers that they have to consider in the secret of their deliberation, because again, the technology makes that theoretically possible. So I'm sorry to talk about science fiction, but this is a little bit what the title of this presentation is, the future of money in the digital age. And it may be that what's happening now is the beginning of a big transformation that will be triggered by technology. If that is the case, and last thing, the role of cash. The role of cash. I didn't know where to put it, but it's very important. So this is a very personal view. We have been repressing cash constantly and determinately for many reasons. An eminent economist, The End of Cash, has written that book on the end of cash. The governments are banging down on cash for AML, anti-money laundering reasons, and tax evasion reasons. Cash is being pushed out by electronic payment system. So there's a kind of general, and you have the theory that if we don't have cash anymore, we can solve the zero lower bound problem by putting negative interest rates on deposits, and people have nowhere to run, right? So elimination of cash seems to be modern, it's to be efficient, and it's to be good. Well, cash gives us a certain number of advantages which I have listed here. And anonymity is only one of them, right? It's peer-to-peer. Again, peer-to-peer, no third party. Possession equals ownership. I don't have to prove that I own the cash. If I have it in my pocket, it's enough. Of course, if I lose it, I lose it. And if I lose my private key on the internet, I lose my bitcoins. There are stories about that. It has full government backing, and it has anonymity. So let's suppose that we want to get rid of cash once and for all. And some countries have deliberately a policy on that, right? Do we want all money to be private or public? Let's suppose there's no cash anymore, and that we have a digital cash which is emerging as a substitute to cash. Do we want it to be private or public? First question. And second question, do we want really the cash to disappear, and do we want all money to be represented by bits on a computer and depending on a third party? Because the big difference between digital cash and cash is the digital. And digital means that there's a third party involved. And if that third party is faulty, then you don't have the cash anymore. Okay? So think in countries where you may have civil disorders, a lot of things like that. So I don't think we've thought enough, and we've taken a lot of intellectual shortcuts about what we think about money when we rush to suppress cash. But let's say we go, and you can see where I'm heading to right now. Let's say we go that direction. Let's say that some kind of private money is emerging. Let's say it's rather centralized, which is the most likely. And let's say cash is disappearing. So we need money to operate on the transfer value on the internet between machines, and we need money, digital cash, because we need something which is not... Do we want it to be private or public? Okay. It's very interesting. I watched 2 videos in January back to back, just by chance. Both Jack Ma, the president of Alipay, and Tim Cook, the president of Apple, in almost the same words, they say, we want to get rid of cash. And of course, there's a lot of modernity into that. And if you go to China, in Beijing, to pay with your smartphone is much more convenient than to have to dig in your pocket and come out with banknotes. But do we want that? And if we don't want that, or if we have questions, then we may wonder what the central bank could and should do about that. Now, as I told you, the central banks have been shifting a little bit their attitude recently. They have a sort of benign benevolence towards cryptocurrencies, and the line has changed recently to sort of outright hostility. And at the same time, they were talking positively about central bank issued digital currencies, and now they are more and more negative. My sense is that I hope it's not going to be a definitive position, because if all the perspective I have mentioned come to be realized one or another, my vision is that we need a trustable digital currency usable on internet, peer-to-peer, issued by a central bank. And if the world, if the choice is having that or having 25 or 50 small currencies operating on different applications, plus 2 or 3 big networks issuing the equivalent of their own private currency, I have personally no doubt, maybe I'm biased by my past, but I think a central bank digital currency is possibly, today, as I see things, a very good answer to a lot of the questions I raised. Now, a central bank digital currency raised a lot of problems, The first is the risk of disintermediation of banks. Because, of course, if you and I, we have the choice of having our money in an account at the central bank or in an account in a bank, so having a claim on a public entity, the central bank, or having a claim on the bank, as soon as we have the slightest concern about the economy of the banking system, we all rush to the central bank, and the banks are disintermediated, which is a huge problem in terms of functioning of the credit system, in terms of allocation of credit. So we may get closer to what the specialists call the Chicago school, with banks not creating money, not having deposits, but still doing credits. So another blink to the history of money. There is reputational risk, and those reputational risks are real, because if they have shady clients, it will be their reputation which will be online, and they're very much aware of that if you read their reports. And that would mean, and of course this is not innocuous from a monetary policy perspective, they would have a very large size balance sheet. So the balance sheet of several trillions of euros for central banks will become commonplace if all the population have their account one or another in digital currency, right? But as I said, the case for central bank digital currency seems to me at least very strong and should be examined. We need digital tokens in the digital economy. We need digital cash. And we may want to prevent the emergence of large private currencies. I haven't talked about monetary policy yet and how to do monetary policy if private currency dominates, but it's going to be a challenge. Again, some people say it's a challenge, some people it's not. So there's one word I haven't pronounced. I haven't talked about interest rates, and I'm not going to talk about interest rates, at least in the presentation. But that's the core issue of how you deal in an economy with private currencies. Now, we talk about money, central banks, and of course the role of banks. Now, the banks will have, and they have, that competition and payment system, and I think a lot of us welcome it. We would welcome a much more efficient cross-border payment system, no doubt about it. The bank will use and develop blockchain. If there is disintermediation there, then I'm going to be a little bit pompous here. If there's disintermediation, then the financial system as we knew it for the last 70 or 80 years will disappear and will move into another financial system. And the roles of the bank will change dramatically. And that will be my conclusion. I hope I haven't been too long. I think we all are very used to look at the disruptive effect of technology on our activities as separately, on our business model taken one by one. What these things, which may collapse tomorrow, but they still force us to do, is to think at what the evolution of technology will do to our system as we know it, as we practice it, and how we've lived it in the last 70 years, and it may change. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.